Yesh ledagdek. That's an introduction, which means let's be very careful and meticulous about the reading and the understanding of the text. Bahach tlas bavi chalukos dinokat hatana bipsule lulav. He says that you can divide up the Mishnah into three categories. We'll get back to that in just a second. And he writes, the ain tam l'seder zed. It doesn't seem to be any logical sequence here in the subdivision of the Mishnah into three categories. For example, he says, Ma inyan yavesh etzel gazul. So if we open up the Mishnah says, Lulav HaGazul v'yavesh. And they don't seem to be connected one to the other. Gazul, we saw in Rashi, was a problem of lachem. The Gazlan doesn't own the lulav. And yavesh was a problem of hadar. It's not a beautiful lulav because it's all dried up. Says the Pnei Yeshua, I don't understand why you lumping them together. They seem to belong to different categories. Then he goes on and he says, I would have suggested a totally different categorization. Tfei, what would be more logical? Havi leila minkat, it should have said Gazul bahade ashera v'ira nidachas. Well, listen to what he says here. If I would have written the Mishnah, says the Pnei Yoshua, I would have written it as follows. Lulav hayavesh pasuk, leaving out the word Gazul. And then I would add the word Gazul, and I would say Lulav HaGazul v'shal ir v'shal ashera v'shal ir nidachas pasuk. So let's try to understand the underlying logic of the Pnei Yeshua. What's compelling the Pnei Yeshua? He says the following. When you want to talk about a psul in Lulav to disqualify it, you can talk about a physical psul. We call it a pgam or a mum. You familiar with those terms? A blemish in the actual physical object. Or you can talk about a halachic issue, a legal issue. You could have two lulavim that look identical, but one is halachically invalid and does not qualify, the other does, even though physically they look perfect. And therefore he says that Gazul is a perfectly good lulav. In other words, in its physical appearance, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not like yavesh. Yavesh is, it's a dried up lulav. It's almost like a piece of wood. So therefore, when we get to Ashera and Ira Nidachas, those are halachic categories. Once again, the lulav that came from an Ashera, a tree that was worshipped, looks identical. It's perfectly beautiful and attractive. And so to a lulav of an Ira Nidachas, it's presentable. Why shouldn't that be together with Gazul? Because Gazul is presentable. Gazul is a beautiful lulav. It's a halachic problem that it's not lachem. It doesn't belong to you. And instead, what the Mishnah did was it integrated Lulav HaGazul ve'hayavesh. That's like what we call, I don't know if you're familiar with this term, min b'she'eino mino. You're combining, which I did here. I should give you this example. This is called min b'she'eino mino right here. See, I got grapefruit and I got orange. So you're mixing grapefruits and oranges. Yavesh is a psul in the gufo shel Lulav, whereas Gazul is a halachic problem because the Torah sets up a condition that's got to be l'kachtem lachem, mishalachem. And yet the Mishnah went ahead and integrated Gazul and Yavesh. So Tfei Havile Leminkat, it would have been more logical that Gazul Bahari Ashera, the Iranidachas. What's the common denominator between Gazul, Ashera, and Iranidachas? In all those cases, A, B, and C, that's Gazul, Ashera, and Iranidachas, Ein Hapsul Machmas Halulav Atzmo. Whoa, now he throws in a whole nother perspective. I thought in those three cases there's no disqualification in terms of the appearance of the lulav. They're all very presentable. and it's not a physical ailment or pagam. It's not, some sort of of an injury that the lulav suffered, but rather it's a halachic issue. The Pnei Yeshua has a different understanding. I don't know why he rejected mine. That I can't tell you. But he says that what's common to all these three is hapsul machmas halulav atzmo. What does that mean, machmas halulav atzmo? Ein hapsul machmas halulav atzmo. As opposed to Yavish. So again, he says the following. Let's go over this. If I had a whiteboard, I'd write this on the board. He says that in the case of Yavish, the sul is machmas halulav atzmo, as opposed to gazul, Ashera and Irnidachas. What does he mean? What does it mean, machmas atzmo? The Yavesh is machmas atzmo, and the other three cases are not machmas atzmo. What does he mean? Anybody?
Just a different, as you said before, it's a different category.
Correct, but what is the category called psul machmas atzma?
The thing itself.
As opposed to what? As opposed to human intervention. Let me explain what I mean. In the laws of psul, in the laws and categories of disqualification of mitzvos, you can have something that's disqualified because of human action. There's a human action that was performed that disqualifies the object, or you could have something that with the passage of time, in an automatic way without any human intervention, the object becomes disqualified. It's a natural process. It's not human intervention, but a natural process. And I'm sure that you can help me with this, that even in the secular world, there is a distinction that's made. Like, for example, maybe this is a decent example. Imagine if I'm a farmer and I spray my crops with a certain kind of a spray that might get rid of all sorts of bugs or creatures, that it's a repellent. Now, somebody comes along and he says, I'm not going to eat those fruits. I don't want to eat those fruits. They're contaminated. Then you could have a situation where you have fruits that are growing on the tree and he failed to harvest the tree. What's going to happen if he fails to harvest the tree, even if there are no bugs? They'll rot on the tree. They'll disintegrate, basically. And the difference between the two is that one is not in the gufo shel pri, meaning it's the human action of adding something to the fruit that disqualifies the fruit makes it into inedible. The other case is that naturally, with the passage of time, things become inedible. It's the basic rule of all of nature is that things grow old and die. Even will grow and die. Is that correct? I mean, we don't like to think about it too much, but
even the world.
The world itself is physical. In fact, I once read that the scientists predict that the sun itself, which is the source of all of energy in our galaxy, is going to ultimately shrivel and die. You don't get nervous about it. It's going to take at least 2 or 3 billion years.
But isn't the case different too? Because the Shira tree or the Irhanadekas that we're going to destroy.
Yeah, but
the physical structure.
The question is, Steve, why do we have to destroy them? We have to destroy them because of human intervention. If this tree were left to its druthers, its own, it would not it would not be excluded from Lulav. It's excluded from Lulav because somebody came along and worshipped the tree. Or in the case of Ir Nidachas, the entire city was guilty of Avodah Zarah. So there was a human intervention. In the case of Yavesh, I don't need any human intervention. With the passage of time, the lulav, like everything else on this world, is going to shrivel up and dry. Moisture just doesn't. By the way, on the side, Rabbeinu Bachai is of the opinion that after Tchias HaMesim, our bodies will live forever. Now, how's that possible? So he answers that our bodies need moisture, and we dry up and we die. But after Tchias HaMesim, the body will be such that it has its own supply of moisture and it will live forever. Fascinating, Rabbeinu Bachai. But getting back to our distinction, the Pnei Yoshua is like rewriting the Mishnah for us. And he's saying that, you know what? Gazul is human intervention. Asher Dachas is human intervention. It's al yidei Maisa Ha'adam. But in the case of Yavesh, that's Lulav Atzmo. The Lulav itself, with the passage of time, without any human intervention, will dry up and shrivel. And therefore, he rewrites the Mishnah. In his writing of the Mishnah, it would say Lulav Hayavesh Pasul, and that's Machmas Atzmo. And then it would go on and say Lulav HaGazul, the Irani Dachas, Vasher, etc., Pasul, because that would be a different category. That's already Maisa Ha'adam. There's a human intervention. Fascinating how much thought went into just simply reading the Mishnah carefully and coming up with categories. I don't know about you, I get very excited about this. He says the following: the bishloshtam ein apsul machmas halulav atzmo ela machmas maisa ha'adam. Ubi Yavesh, but in the case of Yavesh, it's considered machmas atzmo. The Yavesh is something that automatically will happen inevitably with the passage of time. Then he says that Yavesh shayach lemisnei bahari niktam rosho v'nifritzu olav. He says that things get damaged with the passage of time. They lose their moisture and they dry, or parts of it, falls off. You've seen this. Like, for example, if the old time esrogim, when I was a kid, maybe you remember these days when they had a pitum. Do you remember those days? Today, today is kind of rare. All my children buy an esrog without a pitum. Yeah. I said, come on, guys. When I was brought up, we bought an esrog with a pitum.
How does it be without a pitum?
In certain countries, it grows without a pitum. And that's the way it is in nature. So it's kedera kedilasam and it's kosher. But, there was a famous Jewish writer. His name was Shai Agnon. You heard of him? So he wrote short stories. One of his favorite short stories is called Ha'etrog. And it's all about the pitum of an esrog. And about a child, and he dropped the esrog and the pitum fell off. And...
There's a story about Soloveitchik about it. Which is Chaim Melody. Another time.
Okay.
Soloveitchik told the story.
All right.
Told the story, the rabbi.
So that's going on over here. You have Niktam Rosho or Nifritzu Olav. This is what happens that, with time, the lulav sort of falls apart. Its head falls off. I don't know if you've ever seen on the top of a lulav, I don't have a picture of it now, there's a little crown on the top. And very often it falls with the passage of time. But says the Pnei Yoshua, that those categories, namely the lulav hayavesh, the lulav sheniktam rosho, and the lulav shenifritzu olav, are all psulim machmas atzmo, meaning they automatically, with the passage of time and the disintegration of an organism, in this case of a lulav, they become possible. And therefore they should have been grouped together under one. But Gazul is machmas maisa adam, and that belongs to the category of Asherah and Irani Dachas. Vanirol anias daiti, Okay, when you hear those words, in my destitute, limited mind, in my intelligence, I would suggest the following, says the Pnei Yehoshua. Whenever you hear that, you got to wake up because he's telling you a big chiddush. Sh'Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Shana HaMishnah B'Lashon Chachma Ma'od. In other words, don't underwrite Rabbeinu HaKadosh. When he authored the Mishnah, there was a lot of wisdom. And now the Pnei Yehoshua is going to apparently reveal to us how Rabbeinu HaKadosh combined HaGazul with Yavesh. Well, these are two fundamentally different categories. One is Machmas Atzmo, and that's called Yavesh. And the other is Machmas Maisa Adam, and that's the case of HaGazul. The Asi Lashmeinan, and Rebbe did it deliberately to be Machadish Tos. Lashmeinan means to make sure that we know and understand that HaGazul Dumya Diyavesh. You hear this? That HaGazul is possible like Yavesh is. What does that mean? I mean, let's just think for a moment about HaGazul. Right, the HaGazul we said was a psul machmas maisa adam. Right, there's no inherent change in the Lulav. It's a stolen Lulav. When Shimon steals it from Reuven, it looks the same in Shimon's possession, the Gazlan, as it did in Reuven's possession, the Nigzal. But it's maisa adam. Maisa adam. Well, there's a fundamental difference between a psul and maisa adam and a psul machmas atzma. And that is the concept of reversibility. Have you ever heard of that? If it's not clear, please let me know. What does that mean, reversibility? In the world of Jewish law, when an action changes the status of something, it's reversible. Every action could be reversed. You have to do something else, but when you do something else, we'll call it action B. Action B will now neutralize action A. So action A caused a psul, disqualification. But then you could remove that disqualification. Why? I'll give examples in a minute, but why can you remove that disqualification? Hello, anybody with me? Steve, you dropped out? Or you're still there. Why can you remove a disqualification if it's machmas maisa adam?
Because man can fix what he broke.
Exactly. But if it's machmas gufo, what does that mean with the passage of time and the physical structure of the object and its chemical bonds have changed? That's irreversible. So therefore, if I woke you up in the middle of the night and I told you that the psul of HaGazul in Lulav is a psul machmas maisa adam, it's a result of human activity, namely the act of stealing, there's nothing inherently that changed in the Lulav, what conclusion would you have derived? Is it reversible or irreversible? Nobody's following me. I'm getting very nervous here. Should we start again? I'm not going to give up with you guys. I'm going to try again and again. There are two types of psulim. There's a psul machmas atzmo, which is a process, we called it, of disintegration with the passage of time. And then there's a psul machmas maisa adam. And I'm asking you the following question. What is the difference between the two? And my answer to you was reversibility versus irreversibility. You can reverse an action by doing another action to counter and to neutralize the first action. Do you follow what I mean? Like I sell you something and then I buy it back. So even though I sold it to you and now it's yours, I can buy it back from you. That's reversible because nothing has changed in the object. But if the object itself, with the passage of time, has disintegrated, that's called a psul machmas atzmo. Is that reversible? By law of nature, it's irreversible. Today, Baruch Hashem, we have something called, how you say in English, hashtalat ivarim, organ transplant, transplants. So you could have a transplant, right? Okay, so you have a transplant. It means basically this organ was kind of dead in the first human being, but now it comes alive in a second human being. So we can take a cornea from a dead body and we can transplant it into a live body, and all of a sudden that person has a cornea that functions. But as a general rule, in biological terms, once the biological malfunction and integrate and what's the word I wanted to use, and disintegration has occurred, it's irreversible. So let's say you were a student in Rabbeinu HaKodesh's class, and Rabbeinu HaKodesh would tell you that there's a psul called HaGazul, and then there's a psul called Yavesh, right? So this is the way that Rebbe would transfer it over, would transmit it to you. He would say, Lulav HaGazul pasul, Lulav HaYavesh pasul, separating the two. Because Lulav HaGazul pasul, that's called Maisa Adam, and Lulav HaYavesh pasul, which is called Machmas Atzma, with the natural progress of time. What conclusion as a student in his class would you have derived from that? You know, in baseball, 2 strikes is pretty bad, but you're still in the game.
So in
3 strikes and you're out.
In HaGazul, I could rectify it. I could return it to the person I stole it from.
If it wasn't Zoom, I would give you a hug because he saved me. If I was in the class of Rebbe, I would have assumed that there's a way of reversing the psul of HaGazul. And what that might mean is the following. You know, I call up the police and I say, okay, look, I happen to know that this Lulav was stolen. You know, you don't admit that you stole it because, you know, self-incrimination and all that. Can you do me a favor, my favorite officer in the police? Can you call up the owner and find out for me if he is going to pursue the object and try to get it back? And the policeman calls him up and he says, listen, there's somebody out there stole your Lulav. Do you actually foresee or hope or fantasize that it'll be returned to you? I gave up hope. I despair. What's that called in halachic terms? Anybody know? Yesh. Yesh is despair. And for example, if you find a lost object and there's Yesh, the Gemara in Bava Metzia Perek Sheni, which they taught me when I was in 4th grade, I probably didn't understand a word. Anyway, now they're smarter. They teach brachas to 4th graders. But in my day, they taught Elu Mitzias. Then we had to learn about Yesh Shalom Midas. Okay, but at least you can understand brachot on one level. But how do you explain to a 4th grader who's barely a tzutzik, he's 8 years old, 9 years, explain about Yesh Shalom Midas? Very difficult. Anyway, getting back to my point, the Gemara says in Bava Metzia that if you find a lost object, and there's reason to believe, again, we have to know how to prove that the owner of the object gave up, he despaired. That's called Yesh. Then you're allowed to keep it for yourself. Let's apply that to a gazlan. In a sense, when you steal an object and the owner of the object has no clue who you are or where you are, that's like a lost object. And if we call him up and he says Yesh, which is called in the Gemara's language, woe to me that I lost such a diamond ring, then Yesh undermines the whole story. So let's say he stole a lulav, and between the time of the theft and the time of Sukkah, we find out that lo and behold, the owner of the lulav gave up hope. He despaired. I can now reverse the original psul, which was Maisa Adam. Nothing changed in the lulav. when I stole the lulav, not me, but somebody else stole the lulav. I don't want to accuse myself of stealing a lulav. But nothing changed in the gufo shel lulav. It's not machmas atzmo. The lulav is perfect. It's wonderful. But something changed because of Maisa Adam. There was a Maisa Gzela that was done and implemented on this lulav. Well, I'm going to remove that through Yesh. It's reversible. Is that true? It was true before Rebbe wrote the Mishnah, because we misunderstood. But Rebbe wrote the Mishnah to teach me that HaGazul has the same status as Yavesh vis-a-vis retractability. You cannot retract the psul of HaGazul, just like you cannot retract and reverse the psul of what? Of Yavesh. Rebbe says the Pnei Yoshua wanted to teach me a major breakthrough, a chiddush of Rebbe. And Rebbe had chachma when he wrote the Mishnah. He put together HaGazul and Yavesh. Everybody understands that Yavesh is irreversible. You can't make an old person look young. I mean, again, there are all sorts of surgeries they have, but basically you can't take a lulav a Yavesh and make it into a lulav that has hadar in it. It will never, ever have hadar. It's an irreversible psul. But HaGazul, I don't know, maybe, things have changed, he's not looking for it, the owner doesn't want it, he gave up on it, and so forth, so he despaired his yesh. Mashmal and Rebbe, man, this is wrong. HaGazul is irreversible. It's a brand new category of psul that's similar to Yavesh. And what makes it similar to Yavesh? It could never be subjected to what? To tikkun, to reversibility. It's irreversible. In the language of the Pnei Yoshua, Hidesh bazera benu hakadosh bazera mishnah b'loshen chachma yiguf asel hashmina de HaGazul dumya diyavesh. You hear those words? HaGazul dumya diyavesh. HaGazul is like Yavesh. Ma Yavesh lesle takanta. Lesle takanta. There's no takanta. You can't do anything with Yavesh. Throw it into the rubbish. Who adin HaGazul. So too HaGazul. Despite the fact that categorically it's a different kind of a psul, it's a psul al yidei ma'isa adam. Nevertheless, lesle takanta can never be fixed. Tiafilu yachar yeush, possible. Even after yeush, it's possible. The ma'isi le mikra. Okay, this we didn't get to. The Gemara is going to basically say to a pasuk that equates. I think it's in Malachi in the Nach. He equates HaGazul with Pisach v'chola. And HaGazul is like a physical change. That's in laws of Karbonos. If you steal someone's animal, you want to bring it on the Mizbeach, it's like an injured animal, which could never, ever, Leslie Takanta, can never be brought on the Mizbeach. Let's just take a look for a second. I'm curious to know where the pasuk is. It's on the beginning of Daf Lamed. Malachi. What did I say? I don't remember what I said anymore. Anyway, Malachi. Malachi is the last of Nach. Well, yeah, you're right. And what is the Navi? Nevi'im. And what does he say, Malachi? He says, "Vavesem HaGazul v'pisech v'chol." In other words, in one breath. Okay, we'll see this Gemara tomorrow, but well, I don't want to. Whatever.
Why'd you say Nevi'im first?
Nevi'im?
Yeah. How do you know? Because they printed in the Tanakh.
No. All I'm saying is that Malachi was the last. There were three last Nevi'im. Zechariah.
No, but I'm asking.
Who did I miss? Zechariah and Chagai was no. Oh yeah, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi were the last three Nevi'im. And at the end of Malachi, he equates HaGazul with Pisach v'chol.
No, but I'm asking you, Mishnah, beginning, supposed to be a Pia Seder. Is Nevi'im halachically placed before Tuvim?
I think it's on a higher level than Ksuvim. Like, for example, Nevi'im on Metamis Yadayim. I don't know the Ksuvim on Metamis Yadayim. Again, I didn't. Then I would have given him a PhD already right now, but then he goes for Ikal and Meimer Nami. I have another way of understanding. The Asi Lashmina Dichi Hechi Di Yavesh Posel Afilu B'Yontif Sheni Hu Adin Gazul. Do you remember that we discussed? We sort of touched on it. We didn't get into it yet. That there are certain disqualifications that apply only to the mitzvah d'oraisa, which is on the first day, but not on the other days that are only d'rabbanan. And you might say the following: that lulav should only be passed on the first day. Why? Because Rashi says "Lokakim lachem mishalachem" that only applies to Yom HaRishon. But maybe when we get to the Rabbanans, the balance of Pesach, of Sukkot, then maybe I can be Yotzei even if it's not my lulav. So therefore, we would have a havmin that Gazul would be kosher for the second day. But Rebbe went out of his way to equate Yavesh and Gazul, that just like Yavesh is possible all 7 days, because the essential definition of a lulav is Hadar, and if it's Yavesh, it's not Hadar. Therefore, the same rule applies to Gazul. That Gazul, even after the first day, even though it doesn't say L'kachtem lachem except on the first day, nevertheless, a lulav HaGazul is possible for all 7 days. And that's why Rebbe combines Gazul with Yavesh. That's the Pnei Yehoshua. Really impressive.
Yavesh is different in the sense, I don't know if this makes any sense, but Yavesh is different in the sense that the other things, Gazul and Asherah and Yenidachat, are always going to be possible. Whereas Yavesh, it doesn't happen until it becomes Yavesh, meaning maybe on the 5th day of Yavesh. Maybe the first days it's good. I mean, I don't know if that means anything.
That we'd have to.
Well, it's not Yavesh that I'm saying, but it's been used till then.
Right. You could have a lulav that becomes possible in the middle of Yom Tov.
Right. But it's not like Gazul, it's not like Asherah and Yeridachat, which are puzzle, Achila, the puzzle, right? They're not.
Right. Now, I photocopied a book called the Aruch LaNer, but now, of course, I can't find my photocopy. But just out of memory, the Aruch LaNer, do we know who the Aruch LaNer was? No?
We know. I don't know.
His name was Ettlinger.
Yeah.
First name was Yaakov.
Yeah.
And he was the Rebbe of Rav Shimshon Fol Hirsch. But if you ask me, I would say it the other way around. Rav Shimshon Fol Hirsch was a Talmud of the Aruch LaNer. I mean, the Aruch LaNer was a genius of geniuses.
Oh, so,
We're going in Germany, beginning of the 1800s.
Who's the Rebbe?
No. Everybody knows that the Aruch LaNer was the Rebbe of Rav Shimshon Hirsch. But when you write a biography about someone and you call him the Rebbe of someone, you're implying that the Talmud is greater than the Rebbe. You know what I'm saying? Like if they would say about me, well, I'm a Talmud of Rabbi so-and-so, that means that basically I don't have any claim to fame. But if you write about a Rebbe that he was the Rebbe of so-and-so, you're sort of like implying that his credentials are that he have a Talmud. So a lot of people, they think of the Aruch LaNer, the Aruch LaNer, let's write up his biography, his profile. You know, if he wrote a CV, I have a Talmud by the name of Rav Shimshon Fol Hirsch. I would say it the other way around. Let Rav Shimshon Fol Hirsch on his CV, let him argue that he's a Talmud of the great Aruch LaNer. But anyway,
I don't remember the exact terminology, but I can tell you that Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger was the last great Torah scholar in Germany.
could be.
So
I'm not sure why there's like music in the background here. Anybody know?
What?
Okay, it doesn't matter. Stop. Anyway, let me share with you the Aruch LaNer and Buli Neder, unless they have it here on the shelves, it could be. We'll try to see it inside, at some point.
Do they have it here? They what?
The Aruch LaNer.
No,
Would they have it? No? Okay. So I actually photocopied it, but where did I put my photocopy? I don't know. Oh, maybe it's on here somewhere. No. Okay. The Aruch LaNer claims, I'm going to develop it in stages. There's going to be point number 1, point number 2, point number 3. Point number 1 is clear as a whistle, meaning I don't think you could argue against the Aruch LaNer about point number 1. And he says that you can categorize disqualifications, psulim, under the following 2 categories. There's a psul that encompasses the entire lulav. In Yiddish, we would say the ganze lulav is pasul. And then there's a psul that really pinpoints one part of the lulav. And he says the following, that on one level, you would argue that Yavesh is very similar to Niktam Rosho, where the head of the lulav was chopped off, or Nifritzu Olav, where the leaves of the lulav have sort of disconnected to the shidra, the spine. And therefore, you would object to Rebbe again. Rebbe, why do you combine HaGazul with Yavesh? Yavesh belongs to a different category. Yavesh belongs to the category of Niktam Rosho and Nifritzu Olav. All 3 are a physical deformity, if I could use that word, in the lulav. So far, so good. So I really do understand, the cash of the Aruch LaNer, but here's where he makes a breakthrough in his answer. He says the following, that Yavesh does not belong to the same category as Niktam Rosho and Nifritzu Olav. Why? Because Yavesh applies to the ganze lulav. The entire lulav from head to toe is Yavesh. But Nifritzu Olav means that a part of the lulav has many different parts to it. For example, the lulav has a shidra, and the lulav has olim, and a lulav has a rosh, and a lulav has what's called on the top of the rosh a tyomis. Again, these are terms that we're not familiar with, but hopefully we'll get into this if we want to learn this paragraph. So now, I want to categorize the psulim of a lulav, I'm talking about physical psulim, under 2 possible different categories. One is where the whole ganze lulav is pasul, and the other is where there's a problem in one part of the lulav. Here, the Aruch LaNer draws a second conclusion, or shall I call it a second supposition, which is a little bit, at least for my mind, my limited mind, a little bit more challenging. And he says that HaGazul is a psul in the ganze lulav. You cannot pinpoint and say, well, he stole the top of the lulav, he stole the leaves of the lulav, he stole the spine of the lulav, he stole the lulav. Rebbe combines Yavesh with HaGazul, says the Aruch LaNer, because the common denominator of both is that it's a psul on the ganze lulav. But he leaves Nifritzu Olav and Niktam Rosho for a second category, because there we pinpoint a certain part of the lulav, and the chiddush of Rebbe, or the chiddush of the Mishnah, is that even a psul that is focused on certain critical parts, like HaGazul very often talk about the human body. There's what's called Eiver Shanashama Tluyabo. There's Eiver She'eina Neshama Tluyabo. You can live without a spleen, I believe. Right?
Kidneys, right?
You can even live without
Kidney.
one kidney. I don't know about both kidneys, a little more problematic.
More.
Do you follow what I mean? That's called Eiver Shanashama Neshama Tluyabo. Chas v'sholom, a person loses a finger, he could still survive. But then there are Eivarim Shanashama Tluyabo. You can't live without a liver. You can't live without a heart. You can't live without a brain, and so forth and so on. The heart has to pump the blood. So the chiddush of Rebbe, in the case of Niktam Rosho, or nifritzu olav is to take the lulav and dissect the lulav. Like, do you remember when we took anatomy, like even in elementary school, they had the picture of the skeleton of the body. So you draw different parts of the lulav, and we're going to say, well, this part of the lulav, we can live without it. This part of the lulav, absolutely critical. So therefore, says the Aruch LaNer, Rebbe's distinction here is perfectly understandable. He puts Yavesh together with Gazul because in both cases, we're not going to identify a part of the lulav. We're going to say that the psul is in the whole lulav, from head to toe. But in the cases of Nifritzu and Niktam Rosho, there the psul is the Chiddush of Rebbe is that, there are certain parts of the body of the lulav that are absolutely critical. And the lulav cannot survive without them. It's an neshama. I'm adding this. It's an Eresh HaNeshama Tui. Pretty impressive, no? Let's just summarize. We have two answers of the Pnei Yeshua and one answer to the Aruch LaNer.
About Shera, why is that different than it's the whole body of the lulav?
Yeah, so according to the Aruch LaNer, it could be that Rebbe could have chosen Asherah, but an Erenidach. So I'm saying you see, I'll tell you what it is. Asherah and Erenidachas, I wouldn't even say that they're in the discussion here. I'll tell you why. The discussion is about dissecting the lulav or not dissecting the lulav, if you follow me. That's not relevant to Asher and Erenidachas. Asher and Erenidachas come under a different category, which is called Cherem, which is called Isra Noah, which is Avodah Zarah. It's true. We're not isolating any part, but the psul is totally extraneous to the lulav. Do you follow my point? In other words, I can't benefit from a lulav that was worshipped. That's a problem that I have. The lulav doesn't have that problem. Gazul is a psul in the lulav itself. The lulav itself is gazul.
Why are you making a difference between Asher and Gazul?
Because the Gemara says about lulav HaGazul that it's a mitzvah baba vera, which means that it's mos, it's disgusting. It's like chola and piseach in the pasuk in Malachim. It's something that you can't bring in front of the Ribbon Shalom. Do you follow me? There's something that's begufo. So if it's begufo, then we ask the question: well, is it the entire goof or only part of the goof? So we have yavesh where it's begufo and it's the entire goof, and we have gazul which is begufo and it's the entire goof, and then we have nikam roshu and so on, where we dissect the lulav and we pinpoint certain parts that are critical. Asher and Erenidachas fit into a separate category, which means that the psul is not really related to the lulav per se, it's related to the person, that the person cannot use a lulav that's avodah zarah because the Torah calls it cherem. Cherem means don't go near it. So that's what I have. So let's just go over it. We have two answers in the Pnei Yoshua and one in the Aruch LaNer. Correct? So what do we have? We have in the Pnei Yoshua the following answer, that Rebbe wants to teach us about the irreversibility of the psul. So he combines Yavesh together with Gazul to be Machadish, to tell me the Chiddush that Gazul, you might think after Yeush, it can be rectified because the psul is Machmas Maisa Adam. Kamashmal and Rebbe wants to tell me that no, once Gazul becomes possible, it's irreversible. Even though it's a psul mimachmas ma'isa adam, yesh is not going to change. And what was the other answer of the Pnei Yoshua? That what?
They're all presentable, and there's a problem of halacha. Right? This one?
Just give me a second. I think I switched the order. That's why I'm.
They did. They're all presentable. And there's a problem of halacha.
Oh, Leslie Takanto. So that's good. Then he says vehicle meimar. Now what's the second answer? Oh yeah, that Rebbe wanted to point out that just like a psul hadar of Yavesh is kol shiva all 7 days, you might think that lulav Gazul is only possible the first day because it says L'katem lachem, Mishal lachem. Kamashmal know that Lulav Dumya the Yavish. That's just like Yavish is possible all 7 days. Lulav HaGazul is also possible all 7 days. Then we have the Ochla Ner, that there's a difference between the entire Lulav being possible and specific parts of the Lulav. Okay, then. So let's go on a little bit. We have a few more minutes.
10:54.
You want to stop or you want to go on for 5 more minutes? Yeah, I would go on for 5 more minutes. The only thing is, we don't have any hot water here, do we? Oh, we do? Okay. So, right. Okay. I'm just going to excuse myself for just a few seconds to get a drink.
There on the table, to the right.
To the right.
Yeah. And the kettle. There's no kettle there. No kettle, where's the kettle? Somebody took the kettle. Maybe it was me.
All right. But
Maybe
I have trouble finding things. My wife always complains about me. I don't find things. So I thought,
I put things.
Does that include your glasses?
yeah. What?
Does that include your glasses?
Probably. Okay. So let's take a look at Tosfos. Yavesh Pasul. So you may recall that Rashi invokes the pasuk Anveu. And Anveu means that we have to take a mitzvah mehuderes. It's got to be something beautiful. And Yavesh is anything but beautiful. But Tosfos points out something totally different. Mefarish b'Gemara, and I have a little letter there that tells you to look on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, the letter Gimel. I don't know if you have that. The Iskash Lulav Liesro.
What should be correct?
Dichsivei Hada. V'lo kamo shepirish b'kunshus mishum dichsiv zeh kelim Anveu. The ein v'Anveu el lechatchila lo mifsal b'ha.
Can you switch to Hebrew?
Shalom Aleichem. Ma nishma? It's Nikabel Panav Shel Moshe, Shalom Aleichem Moshe. It's a little bit chaval that Moshe came so late, but maybe he'll get something after out of the last 3 minutes. Yeah. Lechatchila and b'di'evet. Yesh lanu shnei musagim shonim b'halacha. Yesh musag shel lechatchila. כלומר, אני מוסיף למצווה, אני עושה אותה לכתחילה באופן שהוא מהודר, ויש מצב שזה לא לכתחילה, לא עשיתי בדיוק את מה שהייתי צריך לעשות, אבל נשקושר כמו שאומרים, עדיין אפשר לצאת בדיעבד עם המצווה הזאת. עכשיו, במשנה כתוב שלולב היובש, פוסל. אין כאן דין של לכתחילה או בדיעבד, הכל הוא בדיעבד. זאת אומרת, המצווה לא קיימת בכלל, הוא לא קיים אותה. היא לא שווה כלום, למה? כי הלולב יבש. ורש"י אומר שהלולב יבש מדוע? מדוע פסול? כי כתוב ויענבהו. מה זה ויענבהו? מה למדנו מויענבהו? מה? לעשות המצווה מהודרת. אוקיי, לא עשיתי מודר, אוקיי, בסדר, אבל בדיעבד ודאי שיצאתי ידי חובה. איך ייתכן שרש"י מסביר שהפסול של יבש הוא מטעם זה כלי וענווהו, כאשר הפסול של וענווהו רק לכתחילה, אבל לא בדיעבד. כך מקשה תוספות. וזה מה שמונח בלשון התוספות, שלא כמו שפירש בקונטרס, קונטרס הכוונה היא לרש"י, משום דכתיב זה כלי וענווהו, שאין וענווהו אלא לכתחילה. למשל, יש לנו מצווה של מזוזה, יש לנו מצווה של ספר תורה, יש לנו מצווה של ציצית, של תפילין, של מצה. בכל המצוות האלו, התורה מצווה אותנו וענווהו, תעשו את המצווה באופן מהודר, אבל זה רק לכתחילה. לא מצינו ולא ידענו ולא הכרנו שום פסול בדיעבד בנוגע לחיסרון הידור. אם אדם החסיר את ההידור, אוקיי, אז הוא לא קיים את הווענווהו. אין לו את הדובדבן מלמעלה, אין לו את התוספת הזאת של הידור, אבל עדיין...
את המצווה הוא קיים.
יפה, את המצווה הוא קיים. אז אני מכיר סרט, שבסרט הזה היהודי הוציא 1,000 שקל, כשהשקל היה שווה משהו, על אתרוג. מצווה מודרת. הבעיה היא שהחברים שלו לא ידעו שזה אתרוג, הם חשבו שזה לימון, והם חתכו אותו. אולי ראיתם את הסרט הזה? אושפיזין זה נקרא. על כל פנים, אני לא הוצאתי 1,000 שקל על אתרוג. יש לי אתרוג, אוקיי, יש כושר. שילמתי 100 שקל, 50 שקל. אז מה, לא יצאתי ידי חובתי? כי לא קיבלתי, לא קניתי את האתרוג הכי יפה שבשוק? אין דין כזה. אז אם רש"י אומר שיבש פסול מצווה בענווהו, וזה כלים ענווהו, הכוונה היא להדר את המצווה, ולולב היבש אינו לולב מהודר, ואין לו קיום של הידור, אז תודה לי רש"י, שבדיעבד קיימתי את המצווה. אבל כאן כתוב במשנה, לולב היבש פסול. מה המשמעות של המילה פסול? פסול אפילו בדיעבד. לא קיים את חובתו. פספס את המצווה. איך ייתכן דבר כזה? אומר תוספות, ואם תשאל אותי, אז אם כן, מדוע לולב היבש פסול? אז אני אראה לך גמרא בדף ל"א. בואו נפתח את הגמרא לדף ל"א, ונראה את הגמרא בפנים. תנא, יבש פסול, אז רק רגע, איך אני מראה לכם איפה זה? זה בערך 2/3 למטה מתחילת העמוד.
המילה הראשונה בשורה ד' מ' י'.
גם, כן. יש?
תנא יבש פסול.
יפה. תנא יבש פסול, רבי יהודה מכשיר, אז מה שמופיע פה בברייתא, שלא מופיע במשנה, זה שיטת רבי יהודה. אוקיי, מצינו כדוגמתו. על כל פנים רבי יהודה מכשיר, אומר רבא, מחלוקת בלולב. אני מדלג קצת, אבל אתרוג, דברי הכל, פסול. אני שיניתי קצת לשם קיצור הדברים. מה ההבדל בין לולב, שבנוגע לולב היבש רבי יהודה מכשיר, ויש על זה מחלוקת, ואילו בנוגע לאתרוג, אם האתרוג הוא יבש, אז גם רבי יהודה מודה שהוא פסול. אומרת הגמרא, שלפי שיטת רבי יהודה לא מקשינן לולב לאתרוג. כלומר, אתרוג הוא נקרא בלשון התורה, פרי עץ הדר. הדר, הכוונה היא, ההפך של, כן, בדיוק ההפך של יבש. רבנן סברי, מקשינן לולב לאתרוג. הרי באותו פסוק כתוב, פרי עץ הדר וכפות תמרים. אז אם כן יש הקש בין אתרוג ללולב. מה אנחנו לומדים מההקש הזה? מה אתרוג בוי הדר? התורה דורשת פרי עץ הדר, אף לולב בוי הדר, גם לולב חייב להיות הדר. רבי יהודה סובר לא מקשין לולב לאתרוג, רבי יהודה לא קיבל את ההקש הזה, רש"י מסביר שהוא לא קיבל את זה מרבותיו, ולכן אין הקש, ואם אין הקש, אז לגבי אתרוג יש פסול, אם זה לא הדר, כי התורה מגדירה את האתרוג כמה? פרי עץ הדר. אבל בנוגע לולב שהתורה לא הוסיפה את המילה הדר, אז הדין הוא שאפילו לולב היבש כאשר זהו שיטת רבי יהודה. על כל פנים לפי שיטת רבנן, מדוע לולב היבש פסול? כי יש לנו הקש בין לולב לאתרוג, אנחנו משווים לולב לאתרוג, באותה מידה שאתרוג בוי הדר, צריך להיות הדר, כי התורה מגדירה את
אבל אתרוג זה משהו קטן, לא רואים. אם יש לו בעיה, לא רואים. לעומת זאת לולב זה ארוך, גדול, וצריך להחמיר בזה יותר.
אוקיי.
זה בולט, זה קטן.
אז אתה טוען שיש כאילו קל וחומר פה.
כן?
רבנן טוענים שאם באתרוג שהוא קטן, אז יש פסול של יבש, אז קל וחומר, בנוגע לולב שהוא גדול וגבוה, ודאי שיש פסול של יבש. כן, ורואים אותו, זה ניכר לעין. אז זוהי שיטת חכמים, אבל זה הכל מבוסס על מילה אחת בתורה. מהיכן למדו חכמים שיבש פסול בנוגע ללולב? מאותה מילה שהתורה פסלה אתרוג היבש. באיזו מילה התורה פסלה אתרוג היבש? הדר, ה' ד' ר'. היום זה הפך להיות מודה לקרוא לבת הדר. נכון? זה מה שהתכוונתי, יעקב, הבנת? אז הדר הוא אתרוג, אבל עכשיו אנחנו עומדים לפי חכמים, יש הקש בין הדר באתרוג לבין לולב. אז למרות שהתורה קוראת ללולב כפות תמרים, לא כתוב כפות תמרים הדר, או הדר כפות תמרים, או כפות הדר תמרים, עדיין אני יכול להכניס את המילה הדר לתוך כפות תמרים. על ידי מה? על ידי המידה הזאת של הקש. ממילא אם ההדר של אתרוג מוסב עכשיו גם על לולב, אז גם לולב יבש יהיה פסול. זוהי שיטת חכמים, אבל לא מהפסוק וענווהו שרש"י מביא. רש"י מביא את הפסוק וענווהו שמחדש לי וקובע לי שבכל המצוות אני צריך מצווה מהודרת. טוען תוספות, מה זה קשור עם לולב? אז יש לך לולב שהוא לא מהודר, הוא יבש.
רש"י לא מכיר את הפסוק בעץ הדר?
אני הייתי שואל את השאלה שלך בנוסחה קצת שונה, אבל אותו שאלה. רש"י לא הכיר את הגמרא בדף ל"א? הגמרא עומד בפירוש, למה החכמים פסלו לולב היבש? כתוב מפורש להג'ר בגמרא, משום שיש הקש לאתרוג. באתרוג כתוב הדר, אז הוא הדין של לולב בוי הדר. ורש"י אומר וענווהו, מפרשת שירת הים. אני לא יודע. קשה מאוד, הרש"י הזה הוא קשה מאוד. אז בעזרת השם, מחר בלי נדר, נעיין ברש"י הזה דרך המפרשים, ונראה אולי נוכל להסביר ולהבין את רש"י, אבל ברגע הזה אני לא מבין את רש"י, ממש לא קשה. בסדר? אוקיי. תודה רבה לכם.